Hi and welcome back to Bike Speeds. This week we are going to do an epic job on this Giant Propel. This is all new cables, new chain, new cassette, crankset, recall inspection and replacement of that crankset. Everything on this bike was seized, all the brake adjusters were seized, the cables were seized, the tyres were ill-fitting, the handlebar tape had it, everything on this bike we're going to do. You can see this rear brake is binding and sticking, it's not releasing, so when it is pulled out on the road you get this dragging on the wheel itself with the brake pads, and the rear derailleur had nothing happening at all. The lever was actuating but nothing down this bottom end here was happening whatsoever. At this point of the inspection of the bike, I don't know why that is, but we'll soon realise why with that one. Look at the wear on this chain. This bike had literally ridden its last ride. Everything about it was failing. The bike was unrideable by the time it came to us. We have to sort out this chain. We need a new chain. I don't even need to put the measure in there to see how worn that chain is. It worn off the cassette as well, and the teeth on the crankset itself. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to strip this bike right back to the frame, take everything off, clean what needs cleaning, replace what needs replacing, adjust what needs adjusting, and it is an epic job. Even this cassette, I had to wrestle with a screwdriver to get that off of the hub itself. You can see the grease and oil in ground there. It was quite wet, this bike. It had been well oiled, but it hadn't been maintained quite as it should have been, and it had absolutely everything had worn out. So we get that rear derailleur off. Again, at this stage I'm not 100% sure what's going on with that not changing. You can see the build up of road debris on that derailleur itself, so we'll clean that up, we'll re-lubricate that component, and that will all be okay. I had to take the bottle cages off to get this front derailleur off of the frame, so they'll come off. Now off comes the front derailleur. This was absolutely seized solid. It wouldn't change gear at all on the front derailleur. It was held in one ring, so I took that off, and you can see there again it's quite wet and moist, but it does need servicing. It needs a clean up and re-lubricating. And you can see here on this crankset it's very wet. You can see that blackness there, a lot of oil over it, a lot of debris over it, so that tells me this bike's been well oiled, probably to try and keep it running when it was beginning to run so badly. Even look at these pedals. Everything that I was touching on this bike was giving me more and more problems along the way. There was a lot of work that we did on this bike that we hadn't actually quoted for, but I just had to do it in order to get the bike completed and nice. But we did contact him to say his pedals had it, and he agreed to have those replaced. So we're going to get this crankset off, we'll swap those pedals out, we'll also inspect this. So off comes the pedal arm, the one side, and then we'll just pop that crankset out of the frame as well. This actually had a bottom bracket replaced at some point. There was a non-standard bottom bracket in there, and there was nothing wrong with the bearings in there. You can see here that the crankset on face value looks okay. So we're going to take off all the brakes as well. Now you can see here the rear adjuster absolutely seized into the arm of that brake itself, so we need to address the corrosion that's on there as well. Same with the front brake, it wasn't so bad, but we addressed it in the same manner that we did the rear adjusters and that cable guide as well. So I'm going to take apart the derailleur, the rear derailleur. So take out the jockey wheels, I will clean those up, and now we're going to inspect this front chain set, crankset, to see if it's okay under the Shimano recall. So with that, I have to take these apart. So this would be like this on any bike that I was inspecting. Take everything apart. It has to be completely cleaned up so that I can see any fractures that are in the bonding of the two layers, which is the concern with Shimano. So we get those through the ultrasonic cleaner. You can see there how that new cleaner in there has now dirtied itself up with the agitation with the ultrasonic cleaning. So I'll wash those components off, front and rear derailleur, wash both of those off, wash the brakes off. These have all been through the ultrasonic cleaner. So we'll also wash up this crankset, which in this instance actually failed, and we'll show you that, but we still have to clean it for that inspection. So now I'm going to inspect it. I'm using a magnifier there. I can check all the bonding between the two layers, which is the issue that they're having. and in this instance I found several areas on these splines that had actually failed. So I have to take a few images of these. You can see it there on the camera, the split in there. So we'll take a few photographs of those. I fill out the paperwork. There's quite a bit of paperwork involved with these. I have to send paperwork off to Shimano, and then they were happy to replace this one, so we get this brand new crankset through the post a few weeks later in this instance. So this is our new crankset here, but even with this I never take it for granted. I will torque up the bolts on that one just to make sure they're okay. Two of them were okay, and actually two were loose, so we did those and made sure that everything was right there. Now I'm going to just clean up the jockey wheels. So the main frame has been through the ultrasonic cleaner. Clean off that debris there. I'm using a brake cleaner to wipe them down with, so that I don't impregnate the bearings that are in the center of these ones with degreaser, and I just want to clean up the surface of these. The bearings actually were okay on these jockey wheels. Again, I think maybe they may have been replaced at some point, but I'm going to use a little bit of Loctite on the center pivots for these to lock them into the derailleur frame itself, so that they don't come undone when it's back on the bike. So I've now cleaned all that up, get those back together, and then I'm going to lubricate these components. So thumb adjuster, always good to lubricate those. They often seize in derailleurs, so I'm using a little bit of our copper grease on the thread, a little bit of our general purpose grease on the actual adjuster itself, and I'll pop that back in the derailleur. I'm now going to lubricate the derailleur body itself, so I'm using our premium grease on the spring there, our general purpose oil on the pivot points of the derailleur there, and that's now looking just as it should. And now we're going to do the same with the front derailleur. We do sell these lubricants on our website, do check that out if you so choose. You can buy all these. We do a pack of 5, all the refills. And now I'm also going to do the quick release skewers, so a little bit of our general purpose oil on the handle itself, general purpose grease along the shaft there, and a little bit of copper grease on the threads at the end. That will just help stop that bonding into the wheel at any point, should it ever get a little bit of water and debris in there. Same with the front and rear brakes, a little bit of our general purpose oil on the pivots of the brake itself, a little bit of general purpose grease on the bolts that hold that into the frame, and now I can address this rear derailleur cable. So you can see here it actually snapped inside the frame, and the front derailleur cable was actually seized solid in the guide that runs through the frame itself. So these were a real problem to deal with. The gearing and the cabling and the brake cabling on this bike was a real tricky one. This bike was an absolute nightmare to complete, and everything that it could throw at us, it did. You can see here the cable is absolutely seized in the guide that runs through the frame. There was no way we were going to get that out, so we had to put new guides through this frame as well. So I actually taped 2 guides to the one guide there that I'm going to take out, just to make my job easier by just threading through 2 guides through the one hole there. So out come the old cable guides and that fitting that Giant all have around that top tube area there. And you can see here, this was the rear derailleur cable. You can see how that snapped off. It's corroded. I'm almost tempted to say this was galvanized steel, this original cable here. Well, we use a stainless steel cable, so you shouldn't get corrosion like that where it would snap. You would only get fraying snapping, but this you can see is definitely corroded in some manner, so we need to deal with that. Back brake, oh my word, this was a nightmare. The adjuster itself had completely seized. The cable had seized in its outer, the same as that front derailleur down low, so we had to put a new cable guide through for the rear brake, which is what I'm now feathering through the frame there. So there was only one thing left for it, and that was to redo the handlebar tape and to actually redo all the cables on this bike. I'd originally quoted the customer for 3 cables, but we actually elected to do the front brake cable as well, so we did all 4 cables on this bike, just to make sure that everything on it was absolutely spot on and as it needs to be. You can see here the derailleur cable had frayed off in the shifter as well. Very common on Shimano, where they start to break up at that end. That may well have caused some of the problems with the rear derailleur cable snapping, so we're going to put in new cables there. Now you can hear here the headset bearings had also life extinct themselves, so we're going to also address the headset bearings on this one. Like I say, this bike was just the bike that kept on giving. It was almost like a full restoration rather than a service. I don't think I've ever had a carbon fibre bike quite in this condition, where so much needed doing just to get it rideable. You can see there the play in that headset bearing on the top race there. That absolutely had it. So the issue would have been there that as he rode any more distance, he'd have had problems with the bearings, and we'd have been addressing it again. And having had this service done, he wouldn't have been very happy if he was bringing it back very, very soon for headset bearings. You can see there the bottom race is corroded as well. So we'll clean up the steerer tube just to make sure that's all okay as well before we put the new bearings in. I was quite happy with that. So we'll wash the top cap, wash the spacers down before we actually put the new bearings in, just make sure everything's nice and clean as we put the bike back together. And we'll also clean out those cups with a degreaser and a microfiber towel there just to wipe that through. So once I'm happy that everything there is okay, I'm going to use our premium grease to seat the bearings, just to stop those moving on those components, which can sometimes cause a little bit of creaking and noises. So we just want to make sure that they're all seated nicely into the frame before we put the forks back into the frame itself. Now I'm going to use a little bit of silicone grease here on an O-ring that actually sits inside that bearing top there. It's quite common for those to sort of bind up as they slide down the steerer tube, so a little bit of silicone grease there will make all the difference to the way that seats back onto the fork. Now I'm just going to adjust up that headset bearing and torque it up as well to make sure that it's all absolutely as it needs to be. Now I'm going to address these seized adjusters on the brakes themselves. This is the rear one. You can see it's absolutely solid in there and everything about it was corroded. You can see how the outer of the brake cable there has started to go rusty. The spring has lost its spring. The whole lot's just disintegrated as I've tried to get that out of the adjuster. And actually inside this adjuster, after I take this apart, you can see the corrosion on the threads there. But inside this adjuster actually was the little outer tip that goes on the cable itself. Is just sitting inside there. You can just see it by my fingernail. Very difficult to see there, but I'm going to actually drill that out so that we can put a new cable outer back into there and reuse this one. So we just drill that out and you'll see it suddenly move there. That was what we were trying to do, was break that corrosion away so as we could take that end out of that adjuster. The adjusters were a little bit tired, but they were still salvageable. And with this, they are specific to this Giant Propel and this generation of bike, so they're not the easiest things to buy. So we're just going to clean those up and actually service them to make sure that they're ready to be reused and that we can adjust the brakes off of these. So I'm using our general purpose grease on the tip and copper grease on the threads. That will enable the outers to slide and slither and everything to be able to be adjusted once the bike is back together. And again, I'm just using a little bit of general purpose grease in points that touch as we put it back together. Putting in a new little tube inside there. That has a little bit of grease inside it to help the cable slide into there. These have quite a tight right angle here, but once that new pipe is put inside there and the adjuster's greased and lubricated, that will work absolutely perfectly. And I was able to adjust these brakes so that they were absolutely spot on once the bike went out the shop. So I've got new cable guides in the frame now. I'm now putting in the cables. We actually filmed this over several weeks. It was a stop-start bike for us. It was an absolute nightmare to film, but I do admire Simon for persevering with this. And this edit, trust me, has took him hours to produce for the video. So please hit the like button this week. We noticed it helped one of our videos, and it will certainly help this one if you can just pop a like onto the video and maybe just drop a comment supporting Simon and his efforts and his work with the channel, because he does an amazing job. So we're getting these cables through the frame now. You can see the cable guides there that I'm using, that we've set up as we were stripping the frame down, getting everything ready for the stage where we're putting these cables in to make my job easier. And even the cables on this job, they took many hours, and this video makes it look an awful lot easier than it really was. But we have now got all the cables back in the bike, so we're putting the new handlebar tape on there. So fresh tape, re-taped up, just to hold all those cables in nicely onto the handlebars. Fresh ends, and we're now quite pleased with the way this bike is beginning to come back together. Next up, we're going to wash the frame down. Now, you wouldn't believe it with the amount of work involved with this, but this wasn't a full detailing service, so we're not going to polish and ceramic coat this one. With this one, it was actually just a standard routine service, but with all the extra work involved, it made it a very, very big service, quite time consuming in itself. We're using a microfiber towel there just to dry this frame down. All these things are available on our website, so all the cables that we're using and the microfiber towels, we do polishes and ceramic coatings, and all the brushes, the big softy, they're all on our website as well. It's a great way of supporting the channel. It's the way that we can finance doing these videos, and we've had quite a little run on orders recently in the last month. So if you are one of those people who've placed an order with us on our website, I really do thank you for that, because you wouldn't believe how much that helps me and Simon to get these videos to you. So thank you very much if you have placed an order in the last month. Now you can see here with this tyre, if you look at the reflective strip there, you see how that's just dropped down in that channel of the tyre. This tyre was never seated correctly on this wheel, so this tyre would have been bouncing up and down along the road, so even the ride quality of this bike would have been very poor when the bike come in. The tyres were very, very perished on their riding surfaces as well. On the contact surface, it was very, very broken up. So even the tyres on this bike were absolutely life extinct and had never quite been fitted correctly on the wheel as well. So this bike will ride completely different with this fresh rubber. It will be much more grippy. It will corner way, way better than it did before, and also will be a smoother ride with the fact that they're now seated correctly on that rim itself. So even things like that was so satisfying to do with this bike, because everything I was doing, although everything was epic, everything was an improvement to the bike and the way it was, and I could just feel this bike coming back to life with everything we were doing. It was one of the most satisfying rebuilds I think that I've ever done on a bike, just because of how bad it was when it came in. So we're putting the pedals back on that fresh crankset, so brand new pedals, a little bit of copper grease on the threads of those to stop those bonding into that chain set, so that if ever we have to take those pedals off again or the chain set off, we can do that without everything sticking. On goes the front derailleur, so we're really beginning to get the components back on this. A couple of little adjustments as we fit it, pop the cable in itself, get that nice and tight. I will also torque these up on the front derailleur. I always tend to do the front derailleur as I'm putting it back on the bike, because its position can alter if you torque it and pull it in a little bit. So we want to make sure that's in its final set position, so we torque that as we go. Most other bolts I tend to just do pinch tight and then torque them at the end, because I can then do adjustments and alter things if I need to. A little bit of a nip off on that tail there with our little guide that we use on everything, so that we know they're all the same length. Fresh copper grease into the threads on the frame for these brakes. In goes that lovely cable guide there that now adjusts perfectly. I think that was one of the most satisfying things with this video, was the brakes. I got those absolutely spot on. I got them releasing both sides of the wheel evenly. The pull itself was even, so that they touched the braking surface at identical time left and right, so that the wheel was dead in the center of the brakes. I was so pleased with the way these brakes came up, given how seized they were when they came in. So you can see I'm using my cable guide there to get both tails the same length, so that that little loop there is the same on both sides. And now we can get the brakes adjusted with the wheels back in their home position. So a little bit of adjustment there, and now we're putting on a brand new chain. So we've got new crankset, new chain, new cassette, derailleur all lubricated, brand new cables. Everything is going well on this one. A little bit of copper grease in the threads on the frame for the bottle cages. Again, that will stop them corroding in there. Should they ever start to bind, that should stop that happening. And now I can just do a little bit of adjustments on the thumb adjuster on the rear derailleur to get that shifting gear absolutely perfectly. Up and down the cassette a few times to make sure that's okay. Check the front derailleur, that's now perfect and working nicely. Brakes now are absolutely spot on. Tyres are spot on. Everything now is beginning to work and be as it should. The final stages for me at this point is to go through the bike with a torque wrench, to make sure that everything is tightened correctly and everything is as it should be. You can see here we hadn't actually changed these bolts at the front here, but they were loose. So the bottom two here were both loose on this bike. So even for that alone, the surface is worthwhile to stop any movement in the handlebars. We'll also do the front and rear brakes. So this is the front brake where we'll check the pads, the mounts, the pinch bolt, everything there is all torqued correctly. And also the pedals, I just use the tyre here, you'll see, to hold and support that torque wrench and give me something to just push against with the pedals themselves to torque those. The saddle clamp was loose. They hadn't been touched during the service, but you can see there how loose that is. Very common. Probably 80% of the bikes I do, the saddle is loose, so we torqued that up as well. This back brake, same as the front brake, so the mounts, the pads and the pinch bolt are all checked with those. You can see that brake springing back to its central position. Perfect that was. Rear derailleur, a little torque up on there as well, and as you can see from these before and afters, this was massive, this bike. I was so pleased with the way this one come up. Got the new chain set on there courtesy of the Shimano recall, so do book in. You can do that on our website as well, book in for a Shimano crankset recall, and as you can see, massive difference. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye for now.